Alright, I think it's about time we got around to telling you about Firefall's premise. As we mentioned in the first of these videos, a lot of the story is going to be player-driven. As such, it's difficult to guess where the story will go once the game starts, but we can fill you in on the world you'll be stepping into. Like most things about Firefall, the setting and the narrative are a little different. Many of the elements should seem pretty familiar to you, but they're playing around with those conventions in some interesting ways. One of the things we've liked about Firefall from the start was that these decisions weren't just afterthoughts. They were a conscious design effort to tie the narrative and the mechanics, the world building and the world itself, together. It's always nice to see a studio that doesn't do the typical thing of... Orcs and elves? Yep, works for me. Let's get started. So let's talk about the setting. The place? Earth. The time? The intermediate future. It's a world that's been ravaged by two major calamities. Earth's population has been decimated, and then driven to the very edge of extinction. And yet, this isn't your usual grim future setting. Yes, it is an apocalypse to be sure, but it's not the road or anything. Firefall asks the question, what if we dealt with a catastrophe of this scale rationally? Or at least as rationally as we were able to? What if society didn't devolve into backstabbing outlaw gangs and roving cannibals? What if things stayed as normal as possible in a world under siege? Now, I love me a good Fallout-style apocalypse story, and I'll reread The Postman any day, but this reversal of the standard trope is a rather nice change of pace, and it actually creates a much more vibrant palette for the Firefall story than the apocalypse cliches we're used to. And speaking of a vibrant palette, this setting allows Firefall to escape the gunmetal gray and modern war brown we've come to associate with space and shooters, respectively. The game begins in Brazil, with all the vivacity and life you might expect from such a setting. More, in fact, but that's something you'll find out when you jump in. Okay, so what about the story itself? You've seen some screenshots of people dashing around in powered armor, but why? What's going on in Firefall? Well, a lot more than we can cover in 3 minutes, and we wouldn't want to spoil the surprises anyway, but here's a quick summary. The story begins well before the player steps into a mechanized suit. It really begins with the eponymous event, the Firefall. A few centuries from now, Earth is hit with a cataclysmic event, a meteor strike of unheard-of proportions. Much of the world's population is destroyed in the days of raining fire caused by an enormous meteorite breaking apart in the upper atmosphere and peppering the globe with its fragments. At first, it looks like this calamity is going to push man back into the Dark Ages, but then something miraculous is found amongst the ruins. Crystite. Turns out, the meteor was made of an alien mineral, a mineral which would come to be called crystite, which turned out to be an unimaginable energy source. An energy source which would dwarf anything found on Earth. This nearly unlimited energy causes a renaissance amongst the survivors of the Firefall. Manual labor is nearly eliminated. Manufacture is replaced by molecular printing. Humanity spreads out and starts to rebuild the ecosystem of the globe with advances in genetics and biology. And finally, man looks to the stars. We know crystite must have come from somewhere, and so we as a species begin to track it. Humanity is able to trace crystite's unique signature to a planet not too distant from Earth. We begin by sending ships there through conventional means, but even a nearby solar system is unimaginably far in human terms, so we decide to try something else, something a bit more bold, something truly in the spirit of this new renaissance. We try to move faster than light. The Arclight, the greatest ship ever constructed, a ship the size of cities, is built to make the first interstellar jump. It's powered by an incredible reserve of crystite, perhaps the highest concentration mankind's ever assembled. But as the jump begins, something goes horribly wrong. The ship itself starts to burn as parts of it are enveloped by a strange cloud. Wherever the Arclight was meant to go, and however it was meant to get there, it instead lets something from the other side through. The ship itself careens out of control, on a crash course straight towards Rio de Janeiro. In its final moments, Admiral Nostromo, the commanding officer on board, slams it into Fortaleza instead, in an attempt to minimize casualties. With the city of Fortaleza itself nearly destroyed, and the greatest effort of humanity sitting as a smoking wreck in the waters off the coast, humanity finds itself beset by a new, even greater tragedy. The strange gas that the Arclight brought with it begins to envelop the globe. All communication with areas it's subsumed are lost, and even local communication is disrupted. And this is where you pop in. The surviving Admiral Nostromo has declared martial law around Fortaleza. Strange creatures are coming out of the fog, now called the Melding, to attack what remains of Fortaleza. Right now, it seems like the massive reserves of crystite on the Arclight are somehow keeping the Melding at bay, but every day the attacks from the creatures pouring forth from the Melding get worse, and every day the fog rolls a little bit closer to town. No one's in full panic mode yet, but something's gotta be done. You have been recruited to help safeguard what's left of humanity, as well as to collect crystite to hold the Melding at bay. But what makes this story compelling isn't just the setup. It's the questions it leaves you, the player, to answer. Is this the end of humanity? Are there other surviving towns out there? What is the Melding? And who are the strange beings that come out of this all-consuming fog? What is crystite? How does it function? Why isn't the Melding overrunning Fortaleza? Is there any way to drive the Melding back and restore Earth? And what exactly happened to the Arclight anyway? And where did the Firefall really come from? It's a story built around questions and mysteries for the player to unravel, and that participatory element makes it far more compelling. This is what makes it need a game to be told properly, rather than being better suited to a book. We've seen the story documents. It's all there, waiting to be unearthed by players living the narrative of this game. Of course, all of this is dependent on Red 5's ability to execute on this idea, but so far it's looking pretty good. And this setup, coupled with the player-driven nature of the world, is one of the things that I'm most excited about for Firefall. Fingers remain crossed. See you next time.